Morning. Welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, karibu sana. If you're coming back, thank you. Today, we have our annual African conference, the African Graduate Club at Notre Dame. At 1, we should be there by 12:40.
I am done and I am very late. It's 10 minutes to the thing starting and I'm not even there yet. I'm embarrassed.
To have our first keynote panel session, and for this I will be introducing Mr. Ibrahim Rashid to moderate the keynote panel.
For our panel today, first I would like to introduce Dr. Ibrahim Musa, who is a Mirza family professor of Islamic thought in the Q School. We have Father Paulinus Ogogo, who is also a professor in theology and African studies. With his PhD graduate school at the University of Toronto, he's done numerous works beyond Africa, despite his focus on Africa. He's also done. I'd like to introduce Dr. Bernard. Also, he's a professor at the African Studies, but affiliated with political science. His most recent book, which I'm still reading, is on the critique of political decolonization. And I'd like to welcome to this stage. I would like to start with a broader discussion of what African Renaissance is. Dr. Bernard.
The question of African Renaissance, as theorized by Sheikh Anti, anticipates a future of Africa that is unconstrained by the colonial or any kind of oppressive systems, right? I remember the idea of Africa itself as critiqued by Homa-Bay, for instance. That's what European invention, right? To try to put together people who are that distinct, right? So if our response to this kind of imposition of the term Africa is also to embrace it even further, it also raises many questions. We are unconstrained by the colonial and this kind of exploitative capitalist interest that has increased in Africa. I think I'll leave it there.
I still think that the idea of a renaissance is a good idea, and the way Sheikh Anta Diop framed it. Africa also had a variety of instruments that were not indigenous, but also indigenized it the whole variety of ways. So this fascination and this kind of artificial divide between North Africa and Sub-Saharan Africa, I think that's very unhelpful. Obviously, the person who had in recent years revived this idea is the former South African President Thabo Mbeki. For Mbeki, the key question was the need to strengthen Pan-Africanism, to strengthen African interstate collaboration. And so the question of rerouting ourselves in the history of Africa, in our own role models, in our own histories and cultures and its scripts and its languages.
So how do we make Africa work again? Well, okay, in the first phase, we needed to get rid of the colonialists. And then we can go back to our history, we can go back to our resources and rebuild. The African elite, in the past 400 years of interaction with them, had disappointed Africa. In many ways. The African elite were part of the slave trade. The African elite were part of the dysfunction of non-organization of African states to be able to face up to the challenges of the modern policies. The African elite were also. So I'm not saying that we don't go back to our past. I'm saying be careful what past you want to go back to.
I appreciate what Father Paulinus said there. The colonial history affects all other continents, Latin America, North America, there's growing, people might not want to know. We want to make sure that our people are safe, that our people are healthy, and that they can prosper in their own context. It's great to be in Paris or in Greece, but it's not great to be there that you don't see your you don't see your parents dying, you can't be at those funerals, you can't be where your heart beats like you feel that you're at home. So I think the kind of energies that I would have had if I'd been home is very different from the energies here. I think it's in terms of scholarly progress and so on. I gain by being here because in this part of the world, there's a lot of support for the kind of scholarly work that we do. I know of colleagues elsewhere on the continent where that is not that easily available, and they envy us. But we need to make sure that we give back to make those institutions better by creating the kind of dialogue and creating the kind of networks that we ought to share with our colleagues out there in ways that they want, not the way we want. You know, what are the moral resources that religious leaders across the continent can provide? To one, to sustain the hope. Second, to make sure that people don't engage in corruption. Where is the ethical? And how do we inculcate the ethical in the leadership itself?
In that sense, every dollar that is invested in Africa, about $10 to $20 is extracted. And yet we call Africa poor. And we use that as a leverage over the economy and their politics. I think that is the problem. That is why I said we should imagine a better future outside capitalism and this constraint. Even if we succeed in applying capitalism, we will produce another problem that China and India is facing right now, right? Where the top rich will amass a huge sum of wealth and the poor will suffer. Capitalism is not the way out.
In my mind, your point is very well taken, but I'm interested to hear your perspective on whether or not you see a glimmer of hope in that experiment. It's very, again, finite, it's very hyper-localized.
Yeah.
But I'm interested in your take on whether or not we can look to that as potentially a model. I don't think DRC will be unshackled from the plight that you talked about. I think it's a very, very apropos point.
Absolutely.
But, you know, there might be a glimmer of hope.
What about this kind of communitarian politics that we had prior to this kind of interruptions in our society? Can't we repurpose that for the future?
Thank you.
Welcome again to our YouTube channel. So today we are at the African Graduate Club Africa Conference at the University of Notre Dame. Nancy, what do you have to say so far about the conference?
So good. We've had very insightful panelists. They are coming later at 4 p.m. After they start on the 4. All is well. We're doing well.
This is Uche Gold.
Yes.
She gave us some sweet, soothing, heavenly voice. Do you want to give us some accolades? Africa Conference at the Hesbeck Center of the University of Notre Dame, and I'm in charge of the YouTube channel today.
Not me.
Yeah.
If you're new here, karibu sana. If you're coming back, welcome. Oh, that's our photographer for the day. How are you enjoying the conference so far?
Yeah, the conference has been very educative. And also it has been very revealing, talking about the possibilities in Africa, the African continent, talking about the growth, and also talking about the failures.
The conversation was great. I think it left everybody, certainly not just me, with a lot of questions to mull over.
I'm learning a lot, and it's something that I didn't expect. I think like the cultural elements to it is adding like a unique component. When I think of conferences, I think of just boring people just talking about themselves or the work that they do, but this one has like more of a community element to it. So I'm having a good time here.
So when asked to share my insights on the African diaspora's role in the continent's development today, I was immediately reminded of the range of opportunities, challenges, and emerging issues we can discuss today. There are so many. The current trajectory of global population dynamics indicates that by 2050, 1 out of 4 people in the world will be African. Okay? These trends have been confirmed by the likes of the United Nations, the African Development Bank, the International Monetary Fund, the list goes on. We have to consider what that phenomenon means for our global economy, for emerging technology, or a combination of the two is so low, that you get to a point where you have to depend on the international community, the outside world, to come and clean up the mess on aisle 2. So rather than, and I don't necessarily think it's a binary choice, right? Where you say, we're going to challenge the UN system, we're going to challenge the international organizations that are putting their fingers on the scale. We have to challenge the regional governments that are ultimately the ones that have the social contract with the people, are supposed to be protecting the people.
We gathered here today as a force that will transform, drive the change that we need for Africa. Ladies and gentlemen, Africa is a continent and a country on its own looks. If you are out from Africa, a lot of people just believe that you're coming from one particular big country with different states, not independent or sovereign countries. Everywhere you go, if we want to be seen and recognized, fight against racism, segregation, and everything, we must invest in agriculture, social structure, our mindsets. In Africa, in the country we are coming from, small thing that we can settle using science or whatsoever, they have to go to the church and pray for almost 2 weeks. They are praying.
My country.
You know, they are praying. So the social structure, the mindset, we have to change it. The last one is infrastructure. How can we build our infrastructures? We have to connect our continent. Moving only from Sierra Leone to Ghana is about 2 hours flight. I will spend more money than traveling from Sierra Leone to Europe. It's disastrous.
Do you see Africa leveraging this resource to, pivot towards a development that's more sustainable across all these things that you mentioned? Or are there things we should move away from and think about how we generate our resources in ways that are more sustainable? Thank you.
The Francophone West Africa, Mali, Niger, and you have, I think, Burkina Faso. All of them have coup. What they are doing right now to move from that leapfrog of development, they seize power through the military, and the military has decided to have these 3 nations as one confederation, having one currency, and go back to agriculture. And what other external forces or external investors have brought in that are taking more from the continent and bring little to the continent, they've terminated most of those contracts. And they are calling on for new partnership under the BOT. The BOT is build, operate, and transfer. I think that's what we need in Africa. You come, you want to invest in agriculture, okay, bring your money, invest on agriculture and remove your subsidies. Don't bring the money cash and give it to our politicians. And majority of these politicians are what? Puppets from the West. They are puppets from the West, I'll say it. So we need BOT, not so leapfrog again, development. Thank you.
Yeah. Me too.
My presentation today is entitled Preventing Conflict and Promoting Stability, Insights from West Africa. They could potentially be and currently are experiencing the spillover effects of the conflict from the Sahel, Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso. And so the United States are seeing these democracies and wanting to help promote stability and prevent conflict in these areas. And so the GFA outlines 3 objectives for coastal West Africa, which I'll comment on it later. But the first one is to improve social cohesion between and within at-risk communities, to improve government responsiveness, inclusion, and accountability at-risk communities,
and enhance security force responsiveness and accountability of at-risk communities. And lastly, in this case, coastal West Africa experts. So we wanted to speak with locals or multilateral organizations that are working in these contexts, that know the context in which the United States should consider when designing and implementing programs.
Thank you so much for being here. So my name is Bupe Luhano Kavaye and I'm from Zambia. So my research today is on women's political representation in the Zambian National Assembly, and this is the legislative body of governance in Zambia. And according to the UN Women, and this is pre-COVID, it would take another 40 years for men and women to be equally represented in national leadership. My key question is, with all of these statistics, low representation of women, what are the pathways for women into Zambian politics particularly? Observing the members of parliament and also conducted interviews with 16 out of the 25 women members of parliament. I should say that was a very, very, very difficult task. So 52% of women who are currently in the Zambian National Assembly come from political families, or so they're currently related to they are related to a current or a former political leader, and that's very evident based on like name recognition. So name recognition plays a very big role in Zambia. Even myself, coming from a political family, conducting my interviews, I'll say my name and everybody will know who I am, and that provides me access.
You mentioned the idea of family as a pathway, and do you think that can be limiting? Because when it comes to politics, there's always this idea that when a woman is contesting, the first place they check is her home. Is she a good woman? Does she take care of her husband, her kids? Is she divorced? Unlike the men, where by the idea for them to contest, no one checked their background, their family background. So I'm really curious if you can talk more about this idea of family. Can it sometimes limit women in Zambia, not just as a pathway, but sometimes as a limitation to their progress in political career?
A big chunk of the men in Zambia who are currently in politics come from political families as well. So the whole theory of family dynasties and politics is still existing. But on the flip side of it, for women as well, most of the women I interviewed did say yes. Like most times people are checked, like, oh, is she married? Because if she's married, then she will give her more respect. It's a barrier for women, but at the same time, women are leveraging it as a pathway to get into parliament.
Okay.
She did very well.
All right, so we'll be moving on to the final section. And as a result, we will be inviting one of the partners, Dr. Ellis, who represents the Pamoja End the Africa Initiative, to come and give us a word. Please.
This is a graduate students event. I'm a teacher, special ed teacher in South Bend, so I really would like to pass on my gift to the second winner.
Africa, even if they are non-Africans, interact to advance Notre Dame's global agenda, specifically in terms of Africa.
So the conference has just ended. That's Josh, my friend, who's trying to say. I don't know what he's trying to say. That's the president. Good morning. Happy Monday. I have tea. It's so hot. The peace studies concentration are presenting the work. Halkana was in Ethiopia and Kenya, and Angela was working in DC. And I'm gonna watch them.
Now, I will leave the floor for Halkana to present us insights from his project titled Evaluation of the Tigray Peace Agreement in the Ethiopian Civil War, a conclusion or a prologue. And like they say in Swahili, wakati ni wako.
Let me take this opportunity to welcome you to my TED Talk. I'm from the northern part of Kenya, which borders Ethiopia. Any conflict that happens in Ethiopia affects my country. And also, since we border to the south, the first repercussion that the conflict that arises on Ethiopia, anything bad that happens to Ethiopia, the first repercussion is in the northern Kenya. Secondly, I want to be clear that I worked with the Professor Ambassador Mohamed Bouyo. He is a special envoy for Red Sea, Somalia, and Gulf of Eden. There was a strategic review of the peace agreement in Addis Ababa at AU. I'll take you through the key points of the peace agreement. Then the other one look at the aspect of transitional measures. Post-agreement development, there was a significant improvement of overall insecurity in the area under the interim regional
will never be enough to present everything that you have worked on, but we can use the Q&A part. Fatima Faisal Khan, who will be responding to Halkano's capstone project, and she will ask him some questions.
In terms of your presentation and your paper, I appreciated the depth of your research and the way that you articulated critical elements necessary for sustainable peace in the Tigray region. Particularly that you emphasize the need for an inclusive peace agreement. So while discussing non-inclusive peace agreements that lead to war, it might be enriching to explore specific past instances where exclusion has directly led to conflict resurgence. Could you elaborate on the direct and indirect impacts of Eritrea's involvement in shaping the conflict's trajectory and its resolution? And then concerning territorial disputes,
the northern part, if you look at the northern part, which is in red, arrow, is where the bone of contention is. So in 1998, 2000, there was a war over this area. UN formed Ethiopian Eritrea Commission.
Thank you so much, Halkano, for making this as part of your capstone project. I always say this conflict being one of the most catastrophic conflicts in recent human history. But did you see the current ongoing conflict is in Amara and in parts of Oromia as part of the results of this settlement?
I don't understand the question.
I'll take you back to what happened pre-conflict, pre-civil war.
What about the role of diaspora in resolving the conflict?
The role of the Ethiopian diaspora, I'm probably agree. They're the most powerful. They shape the foreign policy and domestic policy of the nation. On Saturday, we had a guest speaker for African Graduate Student Conference, Sahel and West Africa for USIP, and also who sat on the Hill. I spoke about when the war broke out in Tigray. The Ethiopians in DC and Virginia clogged their email, phones, and a week later she was in Addis talking to the government.
The brilliant and the very bright Angela. As we delve into her presentation, prepare to be introduced to rich research findings that not only highlight the landscape of mental health support, but also ignite a crucial dialogue on improving interventions in the complex realm of refugee support. Please join me in welcoming someone that, quite frankly, we all sit in awe of in our cohort.
Thank you, Tess, and thank you everyone for coming. So I think Tess has done a great job already with the positionality, so yeah, but for my presentation, I would like to share a personal story with us all here. So as Tess rightly mentioned, I'm from Ghana, specifically from Northern Ghana. And in the Dagomba ethnic groups, we usually, growing up, experience a lot of inter-ethnic conflicts. Psychological, emotional, and even physical torture people experience in regards to that. And Tess also rightly mentioned that I had done previous work on migration while at Catholic Relief Services. So on the migration front, I had dealt with recent migrants, so those who usually travel to Libya en route to European countries through the Sahara Desert and the Mediterranean Sea. When we realized that females also travel to the Gulf states and they were emotionally and psychologically traumatized. And that is what led me to do some work on assessing the mental health and psychosocial support services for women in Ghanaian refugee camps. So instead of focusing on the mental health and psychosocial support needs, I rather focus on the services humanitarian, developmental, and other governmental organizations. It takes time for you to build trust with the refugees, so there is a need for longitudinal studies so you can look at the impact of post-conflict on people in the community. On that note, thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Angela, for a great presentation, as well as this opportunity to read your wonderful paper. I think the paper is, of course, as beautiful as you are, and as colorful, because as you can see, there are lots of thematics going on in your paper, including trauma, migration, and gender. I personally learned a lot. You mentioned about lots of cultural barrier and cultural appropriation of the mental health problem. And also you mentioned about the secondary, right? We put this psychology as a secondary agenda in the humanitarian response.
Culture is part of us. We are born with a culture, and most often than not, interventions are looking at westernized culture when it comes to mental health, such as meditation. And from my experience working on trauma healing practices, I tried meditation first time with some of the returned migrants, and they're like, "Madam, this is rather making me angry." So I'm just thinking probably we could have a complementation of both the Western healing interventions as well as the traditional or cultural interventions.
You mentioned how inappropriate or how unsuitable the international legal framework is for dealing with. You can share with us for maybe frameworks, global frameworks that can help us.
I think what the international community can do is to just ensure that these global compacts are culturally and gender sensitive, because most often than not they try to standardize it. So once there is that structured and segregated gender sensitive and culturally sensitive and contextual legal frameworks, I think that would be able to attend to all the differences we have when it comes to forced displacement and mental health.
Literally, government and government positions, state level decision making, or transitional justice processes. I had the pleasure to read your paper, your work, and I deeply admire the theoretical framework that you have used.
Thank you.
I'm going to interview you. Oh wait, you're done. All the stuff that was giving you stress is done.
My anxiety level,
How high was your anxiety this morning?
120%.